So, in the month of November, I'm talking to men about men's issues and what their experience is being a man in the lead up to International Men's Day on November 19th and for Movember, which is all about men's health, both physical and mental health. So today I'm talking to Ryan, and we've never met until today, which is kind of fun. But we have a mutual friend, Tanya, who introduced us, and she thought this would be a great conversation, and I think it is going to be a great conversation. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive in and chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, anybody that knows Tanya, like is someone I want to know too.
Yes,
Um,
same.
so my name is Ryan Reichert Estes. I am an American who lives in Spain. My husband and I left Oregon in 2023 and moved here about 18 months ago, just to go after something that we wanted that looked different from what we had. And so I was in the process of becoming a coach, and I had this realization of, if I can't go for the things that are going to help me feel more fulfilled, like what business do I have asking clients to do that?
Yeah.
And at the same time, he was like, I want to think about our lives in a bigger way. And so it led us to take action on some dreams that we had earlier than retirement. So.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I'm in the UK. We're in the same time zone, basically. We're about an hour apart, which is great.
Yep.
Um, I moved to Sweden about 7 years ago today, and then moved to Germany. So I've done this little trip of like, hey, I want to live in Europe. I want to do this. I had always wanted to. So similar to you, I'd always wanted to. But the opportunity, I was kind of waiting for the opportunity to present itself. So, but then when it did, I almost turned it down. But I had this little moment of like, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. Right. And my plan was a couple of years, and now I'm 7 years later, I'm like, this is where I'm at. Right. So, yeah.
That's great.
Well, it's great to meet you and great to talk to you. One thing that I thought we could start by talking about is, I think I mentioned to you in sort of talking about how I decided to do this series. That when I decided to do the series with women in the spring, I then said, okay, I'll do one in the fall with men. I invited 45 men that I know, probably more than that. It was 45 by email, and then another 5 on LinkedIn where I didn't have a good email address. So about 50 men, and I think I had 15 responses. So, and then I had a handful that said yes, like somewhere between 13 and 15 that said yes. And then I had a couple that said, this is not for me. And then I had men that were just like, what would I talk about? I'm not going to do this because I don't have anything to talk about. And I was like, you don't have anything to say about being a man? Like, okay. Right. And I think as you and I were talking, I was like, what I found interesting was that a lot of the men that even said yes were nervous about having this conversation. I was also nervous about having this conversation. It was obviously much easier for me to talk to women in the spring. So tell me a little bit about maybe why, hey, you said yes, so thanks. Why did you say yes? And what made you, did you have any concerns, or were you nervous about this?
Yeah. I mean, well, so first and foremost, it's that connection with our mutual friend Tanya of like,
Yeah.
she's the kind of person that when she says, hey, you should think about this, I will enthusiastically say yes.
Yes.
Because it's like, all right, I don't want to miss anything that
Yeah.
could be cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, I did. I thinking about the conversation, a few weeks ago when we started figuring out scheduling, and then even earlier today, I'm like, God, what are we going to talk about? Like,
Yeah.
what is my point of view on being a man? And I'm like, oh, what if I get it wrong? and then as like I'm and literally, so I host a podcast with my friend Vic, and literally just posted an episode about this. Oh wow, I just totally blanked here. What did we just launch an episode about? Oh, coaching yourself.
Okay.
So
Yes.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm like our podcast is called Go Coach Yourself, and so we did an episode about like can you self coach, and so I'm literally having that moment of what am I going to do? What am I going to talk to Leah about? How am I going to show up in this situation?
Right.
What is my point of view? And thinking, I'm a little nervous that I don't know if I represent, and then it just would like spiral.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I can totally appreciate that. And at the same time, there are obviously things that, are unique to my experience that of course, yeah, I'd love to share.
Yeah, no, I think what's interesting is similarly when I decided to do this, I mean, I held off until the last minute. It was like a couple of
Mm,
weeks before November, and I was finally like, okay, I guess I'm doing this as I said I would, right? But I found myself, especially in the first week when I started doing the interviews, I was like, what am I going to talk to these guys about? How am I going to ask a question about this, right? And I'm nervous to talk to men I know. And I was like, okay, what is going on? And I realized that I think that it's a micro version of the macro problem
mm,
where we're just not talking. Like,
right,
and
right.
men are just not talking to each other or don't feel safe to talk to women. And women
Yep.
are sort of like, what am I supposed to talk to them about?
Right.
So I just think that there is this bigger issue of how do we talk to each other?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's, uh, just this idea of there being a right or wrong way.
Yeah.
And I think that's what then ended up coming up for me is like, well, the way that I've grown up and learned to be a man in whatever like meaning of the word that
Right.
is very different and has had a very different felt experience than what I
Yeah.
expect many, cisgender white heteronormative guys,
Yeah.
which I'm white, but I'm gay and
Yeah.
didn't fit in. I wasn't into sports, and so like
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that experience is very different from what other people do
Yeah.
when they're raised, and so that there are individual stories to tell, but this fear of almost like I'm not doing it the right way
Yeah.
because I'm not doing it the right way. I just have to kind of keep it to myself.
Yeah. Yeah. As you say that, what occurs to me is like, I think that is fundamentally part of what the problem is. That
Right.
we believe that there is a way to be a man or a way to be a woman, instead of that, if you're breathing and you are one of those things or anything in between, welcome.
Right.
You
Yeah.
are being that thing,
Exactly.
right? And I wonder if that is just very much like what you just described. Is that just like, is that baked into this concept of masculinity and femininity? Is it baked into patriarchy so that we just go, well, I'm probably not the right kind of woman.
Right.
Right? I'm not doing being a man right,
Yep. Yep.
right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely something there for me of, there's a societal expectation that, okay, I don't meet or fit that. So I'm obviously doing it wrong. And then when you do find your group, so it's like finally, like, I came out in high school, in college, I was like, okay, this is the time to reinvent and to
Yeah,
like try things. And then I'm like, oh, and I'm gay and I'm openly gay.
yeah,
Oh, the gay community doesn't think I'm the right kind of gay person either. So like then there's
yeah.
there's
You're
this
like,
other
great.
wall. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, it is. It's interesting. And I mean, I think in part this is what I try to help individuals with themselves, like, and I'm sure you do through our coaching practices of like figure out who you are
yeah,
and really embrace that. Not necessarily saying it has to fit a certain mold,
yeah,
but then share it, tell people, like
yeah,
talk to people about it. And yeah, I mean, as we were talking earlier, I I really do think there's a I don't know if it's a disinterest or if it's just a fear
yeah,
of not being wrong or a fear of being ridiculed or looked at or not understood.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
that's for me. I would say, like personally, if I speak for myself, it's that idea of like people aren't going to understand why I am the way I am.
Right, right. Well, and it's interesting you say that because one of the things I've said this on several of these people are going to be like, she says this every time, but it's kind of true. There's this old quote that men are afraid of being rejected and women are afraid of being killed or assaulted or raped.
Yeah,
And I do think when I talk, as I'm having these conversations with men, both for this project, but also just in general, when I'm
yeah,
coaching, when I'm talking to my friends, my male friends, I think there's so much in what you just said that is baked in this idea of someone will tell me I'm wrong, will leave me out, will ridicule me, will humiliate me,
right.
there's all of these fears. And I wonder, does every young man have that experience or do they just fear that experience?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably the latter because it's
Mm.
like you were telling me earlier, asking people, okay, so is that true in your
Yeah.
life? Great coach question because it's
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, like let's look at it,
Yeah.
and as you pointed out, the evidence wasn't there
Yeah.
for people. Like they didn't have people putting them down, taking up space, taking things away from them.
Right.
Similarly, yeah, like as you know, I've moved through life, the things that I've been afraid of in
Mm-hmm.
terms of social rejection or fitting in, it was never really because someone was there saying this is not right or you're not the right
Sure.
person. It was entirely constructed in my mind that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that could be the outcome. And uh and I think, yeah, that idea of like role modeling and not seeing it role modeled in a way that
Mhm.
says, hey, you can take a risk,
Yeah.
and most of the time you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And then in the times that you're not, there's something to be learned there too. And
Yeah.
that's okay. It
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily even mean it's about you.
Yeah.
Uh, it could be the system, it could be the other people. I mean, so many
Well,
things.
I mean, we're not like, I said, a friend of mine has a shirt that says, I'm not for everyone. And
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I love
I
that.
love, I
It's
love
so
that.
true, right? Like, I think the construct says there is a right way to be a man. And so you
Yeah.
tell me, because I'm not one, but there is a right way to be a man. And if you don't get that right, you will be rejected.
Yep.
And then if you do face rejection, you're like, look, I didn't do it right.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes rejection is exactly what we need. We need someone to go, I don't want you in my life. And you go, oh, thank God. When you look
Yeah.
back, you're like, oh, I'm so glad you didn't want me in your life because you're terrible.
Right. Right.
Right? But it's like we're not designed to be everything for everyone.
Yep. Yep. And when I think about, you touch on, I like almost helping us identify that we're not for them.
Yeah.
Like when I think about the male role model, let me actually not even call them role models. When I think about figures of what it is to be a man
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
espouse some idea of masculinity in my life,
Mhm.
many of them have not been the thing that I want to be or the thing that I want to be part of,
Right.
and have often, I think, either specifically been like, oh, like you're not being a man, or in less specific ways, such as I think back to one of my very first corporate jobs,
Mhm.
not being like I didn't play sports in high school,
Mhm.
I didn't like understand sports,
Mhm.
and like having conversations about sport be the primary thing that the
Yes.
guys in the office were doing. I'm like, okay, great, nice to see you. I'm just gonna like remove myself from this
I'm gonna
situation.
go over
Yeah,
here.
but even at that age, like in my early 20s, thinking, God, I really wish I could figure this kind of code out
Right.
so that I didn't feel so isolated. When in fact it was actually, no, this just isn't. That's not your tribe.
Yeah. It's not
These
those
aren't.
are the people, right? Like totally. It's so funny as you say that. I'm like, I did play sports and I did love sports. And so I remember being at Amazon and a conversation broke out about basketball. And I was like quoting statistics and saying this is how, when Magic played, did it, and everybody, the guys in the room, they got so uncomfortable
Oh
because
wow.
I think they were suddenly like, "Oh, we thought we knew stuff, but she actually has all this stuff memorized." And I wasn't like showing off. I was just excited that we were
Yeah.
talking about this, right? And
Right.
they actually backed away from me, like in that, and I was like, "No, I'm joining the tribe," and they're like, "No, thank you," right?
Oh. Oh.
So, like, congratulations, they rejected me too, right?
Oh.
And I knew the language,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And it was like, well, don't ask Leah because she probably has some statistics quote. I mean, I remember being sort of criticized then
Right.
for being a
Yep.
woman who had that stuff memorized. And I was like, I mean,
Because
it's
then you're
not like I
right.
memorized, sat with a book and memorized it. I haven't memorized because I liked it,
Right.
right? And I was like, oh, so you'll reject us if we don't know and we're a man. You'll reject us if we don't know and we're a woman. And you'll reject us if we know and we're a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Understood. Check, check, check. Right? So
Oh,
okay. But
oh,
yeah, and I think there's lingo, right? And but I also think I've heard men say that they don't know how to talk to one another or I don't know how to talk to women. And I wonder how much of that is like fear of not knowing the right language.
right. Right. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it in terms of like not knowing the right language. For me, it comes across as, and maybe this is actually the way to jump there,
Hmm.
is almost like, actually, yes, I'm going to go with that
Go
because
for
we live in Spain. We
it.
just we've been here for a while. I don't speak Spanish fluently. I learned French in high school, And it's one of those situations where it's like, I just actually encountered a French family in a local bakery, and I was so excited because I was like, oh my God, I get to speak French with people. And then I couldn't get a lick of French out of my mouth to save me.
Right. Oh
Like
my
mixing
God.
up language
Yeah.
and using like some horrible bastardization of Spanish and French. And they're like, what?
Like,
And
are you
I
having a stroke? And you're like,
yeah,
no.
I do think, like, using that as the metaphor, it's like we're coming together, speaking different languages, and then
Yeah.
not actually even able to understand, or fearing that we're not going to understand,
Yeah.
when in fact we actually both speak German, and we could
Right.
probably we
Right.
have a shared language that we just don't know about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
And
like
I
that.
wonder, as coaches, I think as you're talking, I'm thinking like the language that we all share that I wish people understood is asking questions.
Right.
Like if we
Hmm.
just say, "Oh, tell me more about that." The whole world loves when someone says, "Say more about that." That's why we all as coaches lean on it because people love to tell their own story.
For sure.
And so if you're struggling, I would say, like for men out there listening, if you don't know how to talk to each other, right, or to a woman, if you can get even just a cursory conversation started, then just
Yep.
say, "Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that."
Hmm. Hmm.
And you'll find inroads. I mean, as a coach, I don't know about you, but as a coach, often we start from one place and I just dig for a bit and then I find my spot and I'm like, oh, there it is. That's the thread I'm going to pull. But in order to get to that thread, to pull it and actually have a meaningful conversation, the person has to sort of tell me some things,
For sure. For sure.
right?
the, and a variation of like, tell me more about that, that I love too, is like, tell me more about what that means to you, or
Yeah,
what it look like for you.
yeah,
Because you're right, it's like, then how much better to like really understand, or start to understand, where someone else is coming from.
yeah.
And if I could go back and like coach myself as like a teenager, and you know post college young man, and be like, hey, like, just ask.
Yeah,
don't,
yeah,
don't worry about having the like know how, or having the like secret code.
yeah,
Just ask a question.
yeah,
And I think about how much more comfortable it could have been.
yeah,
uh,
totally. Totally. I mean, I think about the men in my life that I have a deep relationship. They ask me questions.
mhm.
They say like, I'll tell them something, and they're like, "Why do you think that?" And
Yeah.
I'm like, um, because da 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 da, and I explain it, and they're like, "Huh? Have you considered this?" Like, so it's all this series of questions that allows them in to my life.
Right.
Right? We've all been in situations where we go to dinner with someone or we at a, whatever, and the person just goes on and on about themselves and never says, "What about you?"
Yep. Yep.
Nobody wants to be friends with that person, right? I mean, reject me, please, right?
Right.
Like, please, please, please tell me you don't like me, right? Because I don't know how to talk to someone who doesn't even ever say, "What about you? Where are you
Yep.
from? Why'd you move to the UK? What are you doing here?" Those people leave. They create a road for us
Hmm.
to walk down together.
For sure.
Questions for me do that.
Oh, as you share that, I almost wonder, is it is it less about maybe a clash of languages, like using, what
Mhm.
different definitions of masculinity, or different definitions of what it means to be a man, and just accepting that we're all socially awkward inside, like at times. And some people aren't, and those people, I think, are truly gifted, and
Right. Those people are Tanya,
those things. Yeah, yeah.
who I call the Great Inquisitor because she can ask
Yeah,
a million questions to my one,
totally,
right?
totally.
So,
Uh,
but yeah,
and so yeah, maybe there is more of a meta there, of like, I just don't know how to be with other people at certain
right,
times,
right.
and leading to that sense of rejection too.
Yeah,
But I do think, to kind of your premise here, there is something there is something about being a man
yeah,
that makes that feel less than okay.
yeah,
Whereas, like you were telling me earlier, it's like, well, as a woman, I would just have to ask another woman.
right.
And I'm like, even as a man, that I feel like I've figured it out. I've figured out who I am and where I fit in the
Yeah,
world.
yeah,
I'm like, I still wouldn't just go to another guy and ask a question,
yeah,
because it still feels unsafe, despite the fact that I figured it out for myself. I
yeah.
would. go to a select number of people.
Yeah. So interesting. It's funny because what comes to my mind as we're talking about this is, among women my age and older, we've started telling younger women, like, if you're in danger, find an
Mm,
auntie, find a grandma, find a mom, because
yep.
we have been there and we will not let them hurt you.
Yeah.
Like, they will have to walk through this wall. And I did that recently on the tube. I had a situation where
Oh
a guy
boy.
was harassing a woman, and
Ah,
I was watching, and finally I said to him, like, she's not interested. And he said, mind your own business. And I was like, she's my business. So I turned to the guy sitting next to me. I was like, change seats with her. And he was like, okay. And he gets he gets up and he moves and she comes over and sits down. And I was like, well, where are you getting off? Right. And so and she was like, they just all did what you said. And I'm all, they're not going to take me on. Like, it was all bluff. It's all bluff. Right.
sure.
But I told her, I was like, listen, anytime you're in this situation, look for an older woman.
Yep.
We are safer than they are.
Mhm,
Like,
mhm.
you don't know what you're going to get because a man won't necessarily challenge another man.
Right.
I was like, but I will, like, if you're going to hurt me, go for it.
Mm,
Right. But I think that's cool. I think it's community. I think it's like culturally, we have made it really hard for men to challenge one another without it becoming
right.
like now we have to man up and fight.
Right. There's like aggression involved
Yeah.
rather than respectful challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I wonder, like I do think that there is a construct that says it is more risky for men to ask each other for help, to speak up against one
Mhm.
another, to stand up and say, not on my watch,
Yep.
right? And what that causes for me is not disdain, it makes me feel pain for men.
Mm-hmm.
That they don't have this built-in circle that says, I will get your back.
Totally. Yeah. Because then, and it just almost like it reverberates,
Yeah.
and like I'm experiencing pain and don't know how to ask for help, and so that I'm just internalizing that pain or internalizing that confusion, and
Yeah.
it continues to build.
Yeah.
And I mean, you make such a great point about the idea of, there being there being kind of an expectation of like, well, there are three paths. You're going to get nothing, and just kind of like, I don't care, don't
Yep.
ask. You're going to get mocked or ridiculed, like, really, you don't know this, like,
Yeah.
or you're going to get aggression.
Yeah.
And then the idea that it's like, okay, and I feel that way as a man,
Yeah.
and to think that women deal with that, and it's just like, and that's what women have to constantly think about being around men is
Yeah. Well, and I think what's interesting is, there are those three paths that you just named. The
Mhm.
fourth path is saying, I'll help you.
Right. Yeah.
I'll help you.
And
And
we don't explore it because we
no,
don't.
everybody is like, that doesn't exist.
Right. Right.
It's like, what? Of course it does, right? Um, I remember I've told this story before in another interview. I During the pandemic, I was living in Germany. My German is atrocious. I mean,
Okay.
terrible. I lived in Germany a long time and speak almost no German. But I sent a WhatsApp message to a friend of mine who I worked with at the time, and all it said was, I need your help. And
Hmm.
my phone rang immediately. He was like,
Mm.
what's going on? And I was like, I just need you to help me with a bill. Like, calm down. I don't. He's like, oh, I was like, I think they're gonna turn off my power if I don't get in front of this. He's like, A, they're not gonna turn off your power. This is not the United States.
Right.
B, what do we need to do? Right. And he was like, and I was like, wow, you're really excited. And he's like, you've never asked me for help before.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, okay. I didn't know I'd never asked you for help before. But when I think about that memory, I think I want every one of us to have that experience
Right.
where we say, I need some help. And someone says, okay. Because there are people out there that want to say, I'll help you.
Hmm. So true. So true. And I think about my friend and co-host. I hear this from a lot of people, but she is like the role model of what it is.
Aw,
Of like, don't talk to yourself that way because you'd never talk to a friend that way.
right,
You would never treat someone you love that way. And
right.
that idea that, yeah, I would never treat somebody that way if they asked me for help.
Yeah, Not a
And
stranger on the street. If I was walking down the street and someone said, "Could you help me?" I'd be
mhm,
like, "What do you need?" The first thing I would do is try to figure out what they need to see if I can help them.
right.
Right? I would not just be like, "No, I cannot," and keep walking. I just and and maybe that makes me naive and crazy, but I actually think a lot of people in the world would say, what? What kind of help do you need?"
Yeah,
Right? And that's strangers. Forget people we know and who would reach out.
mm, for
Right?
sure.
Yeah.
And then when I like, thinking about the actual role models that I would say are like, okay, like
Yeah.
to me, these are men that I feel connected to and who have taught me lessons about not just what it is to be a man, like what it is to be a good person,
Right.
but to be a good person and show up in the world, knowing what privilege and knowing what power men hold,
Yeah.
for not the right reasons, but
Yeah.
because it's true.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, those are the people that don't fit the stereotype, that don't fit the things that, whether it was society or school or
Yeah.
other people, like put into my head when I as I was growing up. And it's like, okay, these are people who are successful
Yeah.
and who other people look up to. And so why would we not believe that there is something different and that there
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
opportunity to connect and ask for help and honestly just be compassionate to one another.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't you think it's interesting? Like what you just said is so fascinating to me. I think sometimes we look at the privilege we do have
Mm-hmm.
and say, well, I shouldn't have it,
Mm,
right? But the truth is, like, whatever privilege you have, use it
right.
for the
It's there.
good.
Yep.
Like, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and be a white man. So I'm not going to have white male privilege, but I am a white woman.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to use that instead of what women did on Tuesday. I
Right.
well, I need to
Yeah.
use my white womanhood, to benefit
Right.
those who need to use my privilege, use it on their behalf. Same thing for you. Like you are a white man, but you're a white gay man. So
Right.
there is you start from a different position, but you have some privilege still,
Totally.
right?
Totally.
And so how do we choose to say, I will use my privilege on behalf of the masses,
Yeah. Yeah. And
right?
it's so true. And like, I think easy to forget that doing that is the way to start dismantling the inequity that
Yeah.
exists.
Yeah. Yeah, because we can live ashamed of the fact that we have privilege, or we can say, yeah, the system gave me some, so I'm going to use it.
Right.
I'm going to use the
Right.
hell out of it. Right? Like, and that's, I mean, I often am like, you have messed with the wrong woman, right? Like, I'm going to use it to dismantle whatever I can dismantle, right?
Mm,
And I think that's the call in my mind that we all have. It's super tricky. It's super,
mm. It
yeah,
is. It is.
super
And
tricky.
this is, I mean, like, shameless plug for I think what we both do. This is why this is why everybody
Yes,
needs a coach at some
yes.
point in time. Like, because yeah, it is
Yeah,
hard. And it's
yeah,
hard. It's hard even for coaches. Speaking for myself, I'm like, yeah, I need coaching too,
yeah,
because I've got the same things that a lot of my clients deal with. They're
right.
I just happen, much like many people, to be better at helping other people with their shit that's the
Yeah.
same as mine than I am
Yes.
helping myself.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, and as a coach, I find, listen, I'm a coach with a coach, right? I have a coach and a therapist. I think therapists need to have therapists, coaches need to have coaches. And I
100%.
think, I think what I find is often when a client brings me something that I have worked through or I'm working on, the tenderness I feel towards them, really
Mm,
shown in the questions I ask and how I lean towards them, right?
yeah.
Because I'm like, oh yeah, I know that. I know that feeling. Like you said about your co-host, like when I hear people talk so hard to themselves and I'm like, wow, is that how you talk to yourself in your head?
Yeah.
Right? Because the mean girl who used to live in my head she doesn't get a vote anymore. Like I've
Mm,
heard,
mhm.
no, thank you. You'll need to sit over there, right? So, but I do think it makes me feel so tender towards my clients when I hear them wrestling with things I'm either wrestling with or have wrestled with, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And I think as men, so many of the men I know and who I'm talking to and who I know in my life, if I pointed out another young man who was struggling with something they had struggled with, they would feel tenderhearted towards him and be like, "Oh yeah, I've been there.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, then you have to be the one that pushes in and
Mhm.
says, "Can I help?" Right?
Sure.
I think what I really want men to hear us say is like, it is worth the risk to ask more questions
Oh, for
for
sure.
yourself, for others, right? It is really worth
I
the
mean,
risk.
it is like such a universal way to show people you care.
Yeah, yeah. That little bit of care and concern can really open the world up for for a person, for just one person, right? So awesome. Well, as our last question, I think it's a good one as we came to
Okay,
this point.
I'm sure it is.
What's your, you'll be like, no, it's terrible. Um, so as a coach, do you have a go-to question that you love to lay on people when you're trying to
Mm,
get to them?
yeah. I mean, the one I said earlier is like, tell me what that looks like for you, or tell me what that
Yeah,
means for you. I think for me, like getting into a topic and then really trying to get into the middle of it to understand what's at the core of it.
yeah,
Probably things like, tell me why that's important for you,
yeah. Love
or
it.
tell me what in that is important for you, because then you start getting after people's motivations
Yeah,
and the around why they care about something. And that it and so often it ends up not being the thing.
yeah,
it's
totally.
it's something else. And so it's like, yeah, you've got to find the point that you can then understand what's driving, and then say, okay, if it's this that you care about, what can we learn from that? And then you're off to the races. So
Yeah, totally. Oh, I love that. I love that. That's so good. So good. I mean, I agree with you. Like it's really about kind of how do we get to the heart of it because it's never about the first thing, right?
yeah,
When I built
sure.
in tech, when I built products, I would always tell my product managers, customer's going to say this is the problem.
Yep, yep.
Problem is always down here.
Yeah.
Because they're going to say if the button were blue, I would use it more. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. You don't care about a blue button, right? But that's what customers will say. They'll say, "Oh, I couldn't see the thing, blah blah blah." But when you
Right,
dig in, there's usually more reasons. And I feel the same way with coaching. With the person presents with this, and I'm like, "Interesting, let's go here, right? And let's go hang out down here somewhere and figure out what's going on underneath it."
for sure, for
But
sure.
so much of our conversation is unspoken until we really dig in. So,
Yeah. And I mean, and then using that to reflect on this series and these conversations you're having. I mean, it would stun me if a lot of people didn't have that same
yeah,
level of anxiety, or have a root feeling of like, okay, it's probably something I'm afraid of.
yeah,
And
100%.
so what are we afraid of? Let's talk about why it may or may not be true, and then find ways forward. So
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that you're doing this.
Oh, thanks. It's really for me, it's been really interesting to have these conversations and to like I said at the start, I was like, what am I gonna talk to these guys about? And now I'm like, oh, I'm just talking to them about life the same way
Yeah,
I would anybody else, right?
for sure.
It's,
Yeah,
yes, this is just a conversation. I ask
it
questions,
is.
they ask questions. This is how this
That's
works. So awesome. Well, thank you for coming and talking to me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me and others, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you too.
Awesome. If you're watching this, you'll notice there's a QR code below us. Feel free to grab that QR code and donate to Movember. Movember is an organization that raises money for men's health issues like testicular cancer and prostate cancer, but also for men's mental health awareness and suicide awareness. So please donate. Movember is all throughout the month of November, so we would love to see some money come in that helps men get better in these ways. So thanks again.